Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today I do a different one. I want to make some Christmas cards today because I definitely need some more. I haven't made loads, and I'm using our star stencil together with Distress inks today to make the backgrounds for these cards. I'm using the Canson Mix Media paper, and I already picked some pairs of Distress inks. I want to make a more purple background, a red background, and a background in blue shades. And once these are done and dry, and I will put them on my cards, I will add some glittery Christmas trees and a sentiment to the cards. We will do this later in the video. I'm starting out with the stencil and I'm applying the ink to the stencil, the inks. I always have one oxide version and one normal version. Here I have the Seedless preserves in the oxide version and the wilted violet in the normal ink version. I prefer the smaller ink pads because they are easier to apply to that stencil, so you can mix that up a little bit better, but the big ones will work as well. Once I have inked up the complete stencil, I'm going to spritz that with water and then smush it onto the background. I love this technique not only for card backgrounds, it's also really nice to make art journal backgrounds. I think it's a nice and easy way to create your own design papers with a big variety of stencils. I spritzed that with water. I did it a little bit off camera because I didn't want to contaminate my paper. And then I press it onto the paper and pick the excess ink up with a kitchen towel. Of course, it would have been a little bit smarter to turn the paper so I can fit 4 stencils onto that paper, not only 3 like I have it now. But I did not think of that just because of the camera angle. Just the paper was in the same format now. It doesn't matter. What I'm going to do with the excess of the paper when I cut out the frames for the cards, I will make some little tags out of the rest, and if I have some white areas I will use those to make my Christmas trees, but you will see that later in the video. I really like how this background turned out. It's a technique you have to play a little bit with if you don't do that often, because it's all about the amount of water you're using. If it's too much, it will not really work. If it's not enough, it will definitely not work. And that's just something you have to play a little bit with. Next, I'm using the red inks I picked. I don't have many reds. I have I think it's the Crackling Campfire in the oxide version, and I have the Abandoned Coral in the Distress ink version. I recognize that it's also not the most reddish color I have, so I'm just searching for another ink pad in red. And I found that I have the Barn Door, which is the reddest ink I have. So I am picking this. Unfortunately, I don't have this in a small version, so it was a little bit hard to go into these small gaps here. And I contaminated my ink pad a little bit with the oxides. Hopefully that is not a problem at all. I will now spritz that with water, and we will see how this background is going to turn out. Next, I'm going for the blue background, and I'm having the broken china in the Distress ink version and the Peacock feathers in the Oxide version. And I had plans for all the trees on which colors I wanted to use of my glittery embossing powders, but then I realized that I don't have all these colors, and I also learned that my gold tinsel from Ranger seems not to melt. I don't know why, but I heated it for such a long time and it smelled really strange, and then part of it was fine, and there were so many random parts on the images that where the gold glitter fell off, and then I decided not to go for the gold because I imagined the violet background together with gold trees, but I couldn't do that, unfortunately. I also wanted to use silver with the red background, but that the fact is I don't have any silver embossing powders. As there was a lot of ink left on the stencil, I decided to spritz it again with water and make another print to see if this is going to work. I think the background is okay. It's not perfect because the ink was not enough, but I would say you definitely could use it for some Christmas tags, just to decorate the Christmas gifts. Next, I thought that I might mix the purple background with a little bit of a darker blue, so I decided to bring in a third color for the next print, and I'm working with the violets I've used before, plus the chipped sapphire in the Distress ink version. As always, there is a blog post linked in the video description. You can jump over, have a look at the finished Christmas cards, and maybe get inspired over on our blog for some other Christmas cards or Christmas gift tags. I will also link all the products I've been using for the cards. I'm now going to let my backgrounds dry, and I will make a bit more. And then here you can see I have cut them with a frame die, so they are ready to go on the greeting cards. And I'm just going through them to see which ones I have, and then I wanted to go through my embossing powders to see which color of embossing powder would fit onto these cards, and this is where I realized I don't have a silver. For these prints I added wild honey together with the violet colors, and I really like how this turned out. So I'm going to sort out my embossing powders, and then we are going to make our Christmas trees. The reason why I laid out my jelly plate is that this is a really nice way to adhere your stencil to the paper. You don't really adhere it, but the stencil will stick to the jelly plate, the paper will stick to the jelly plate, so things do not move, and that makes it really easy to apply the ink through a stencil. I really often do this because it makes it so much easier to work with stencils, and I'm using Distress inks today to do the embossing because I want to have colored trees, as I didn't know for each embossing powder how opaque it will be and how much the background would get covered up, so I thought a colored tree will be better than a white one, so I'm picking the Oxides for embossing. If you do that, you have to work a little bit quicker. You cannot leave the embossing ink or the distress oxide ink for a long time because it will dry and then the embossing powder won't stick. If you're using embossing ink like Versamark, you have a lot of time until this dries. So you could just make all your papers with the trees and then emboss them. Today I have to emboss immediately after I ink up the trees. I'm using these kind of makeup sponges together with the inks. That works perfectly. And for these trees, I used the gold embossing powder. It's the gold tinsel from Ranger, which did not work in the end. Unfortunately, I will end up with no gold trees. But I left that in here for the video because I just wanted to demo how I work. So it's nothing special, and I will not record all the trees I'm doing, just a few of them and the different colors. I have the leftover pieces of my background papers here, and later I will just work with papers with the same paper that I've used for the card backgrounds, the Canson Mixed Media. It has a nice weight and is very smooth, so it's good to work with. And that would have been so nice if it would just have melted. I'm using the Ranger heat gun with it. Not sure if it's not hot enough, but it had an awful smell. But all my other embossing powders worked out fine, so I think I blame the powder for this. Here I switched to another color. Of course, I cleaned the stencil in between. I'm using the cracked pistachio in the oxide version, and I'm doing some turquoisey greenish trees with different powders. And I really like that some of the powders turned out different on different backgrounds, and that's very interesting. And I ended up with tons of glittery Christmas trees. I also ended up with tons of glitter on my floor, on myself, and on my desk, which was a little bit annoying. It's not my favorite thing to do, embossing, especially with glitter embossing powder. That's also why all my embossing powders are full, because I almost never use them, especially the glittery ones. I use the black, the white, and the clear regularly, but not all the others. I really like these turquoisey trees, and I think they would fit the red backgrounds quite nicely. Here I decided to use that fossilized amber color that I've used with the gold before together with that green, and that turned out completely different, not completely different, but quite different to the ones I've used with the cracked pistachio ink. I'm using the worn lipstick at this time together with a pink embossing powder. I will make some different pinkish trees because I think they would work quite nicely over the blue background and also over that purple backgrounds where I thought I would work with the gold. Now it's time to finish some cards. I prepared 3 of them, and I have some other ideas for some different layouts for cards with the other papers I made. So today I'm going to make these 3, and I have already adhered the background papers to the card bases, and now I'm planning on how to arrange the Christmas trees, and I've also stamped a Christmas greeting. I picked a German one from our new German sentiment stamp set. I'm going to adhere everything with some 3D foam dots because I want them to pop up from the card backgrounds. I think that looks much better than if I would have glued them down just flat on the cards. I will speed up that part a little bit because it's not very interesting to see me putting down the foam dots. I've cut out not all of the trees, but enough to finish these cards. I had so many trees, and I usually cut those out in the evenings when I'm sitting in front of the TV. Here I realized that I put too many of these foam dots to the middle tree, to the one I wanted to put in the center, so I'm removing those, and I just add some to the middle, and I will adhere the rest of the tree with just some simple liquid glue to the other trees, because it's just layering up on the others, and that didn't work out. I do not do a lot of cards, and I think sometimes with the technical stuff, I need a little bit more time than others might. I'm not going to record the whole process now up until I'm done with all the cards. I will show you some photos of the finished cards at the end, but as I said, you will find the cards also over on our blog, and you can have a look at the close-up images there. For the rest of the cards, I'm just laying out which tree I plan to adhere to them, and yeah, it's a really easy way to make some cards, but I think they are really nice because um, they are handmade. They have a handmade background, handmade trees. It's nothing that you just glue together from a finished paper pad, and that's what I like about that. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope you will see us next time. Bye.